Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good. Thank you so much for doing this presentation.
I hope it's helpful.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Well, I think we have
Uh,
about a dozen people signed up to participate.
okay. And then what happens? I know this is being recorded. What happens with that after it's recorded?
We posted on our website.
Oh, do you? Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Okay. Well, hopefully I can be helpful.
Yeah.
Where are you at today?
I'm at home. Yeah.
I think you just froze.
Oh,
There, now you're
sorry.
back.
Can you see me now? Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm at home right now. We're having some air conditioning issues in my office, and
Oh,
today did
okay.
not seem like a good day to suffer with the
Yeah,
air
yeah. I was
conditioning.
just, I was just wondering when you went by home. So you went through the bad air last week then, and hopefully better today.
Yes. Yeah, that was really bad one day. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
it sure was. Yeah, it was absolutely bad. So what I'm going to do is give about 20 minutes of comments and then questions and answers or discussion.
Okay.
Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, that sounds
I think that may
great.
be. Yeah, good. Okay.
Somebody.
It may just be the three of us, huh?
Yeah, that would be kind of surprising to me.
Hi, Wayne,
Yeah,
Mike.
well,
Mike,
we've got a few more people coming now. I think they're just kind of last minute.
well, I'm interested, so if it's only an audience of one or two.
I'm here.
I've got a brand new computer, so I've never turned my video on yet, so I'm gonna have to try this and see what happens.
Technology is a great thing till it's not.
Yeah, let's see here. How am I?
It looks good.
Yeah.
I just been spending 4 hours out in the woods cutting wood, so
Oh, wow.
I'm hot.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hi,
Or
Rick. How you
afternoon now,
doing?
yes, we passed the noon hour mark there.
Hi.
Margaret, it'd be nice if you introduced yourself because some of us have never known you.
Oh, hi, I'm Margaret Donahoe, and I'm excited to be the new executive director.
That's what I assumed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Margaret has experience as a staffer over at the Senate and running the Transportation Alliance for the last, more than a decade. I don't know exactly, kind of lost track, but lots of experience around the Capitol.
Great.
And Michael, I remember when my first introduction to you was way back in the 80s when you were talking about AIDS.
Yeah. Spent a lot of time in the legislature during that period.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been, I remember my first testimony to the state legislature as a state employee was in 1978. My most recent one this year. You can see I've been over there for a few years.
Well, former Speaker Bob Vanasek there was probably interacting you back with 78. And I don't know, Wayne,
Yeah.
Wayne, were you back in 78
did.
or not?
Yep, I was there in 73 is when I started.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Bob's on. Bob, you're on mute.
Unmute, yeah.
Vanasek, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm driving in a car and
Oh, Ross.
really can't talk.
Hi.
I'm not driving though, so that's the good news.
Are you northbound or not?
No, well, I'm heading north. It doesn't take much to go north in Lakeville, but
Right.
but yeah, no, we're trying to hook up with some family members. So,
Should we get started?
I'm ready anytime you are.
Okay. Roz, you're still on mute. I don't know if you want me to kick her off here or. Since Roz is on mute and driving or writing anyway, I will make the introduction. Michael Osterholm is, I think everybody in this group here is well going to know who he is. I mean, he's all you have to do is watch national news programs, and you'll see that he's frequently a guest on, expert guest on many different venues. As I said, when I don't know how many people were here, but as I said, my first introduction to him was when he was talking about AIDS way back in the 80s. And then through a series of other calamities, we worked our way through up to recently the COVID stuff, and not totally out of the woods on that, but things seem to be getting better on COVID, but still reason for caution. And then I think, Michael, you're going to introduce us to a new prion disease that this should be on our radar screen that isn't probably at this point in time. So, and he's currently at the University of Minnesota. He has previously been the state epidemiologist, for those who are not aware of where Michael currently is, but he's at the University of Minnesota. So glad to have you. This is I'll say two things about this particular time. It's first time we've tried an event on a Monday. And secondly, it is we also hit Juneteenth, and our executive board talked about that, and we decided not to try to reschedule with respect to Juneteenth. That happened after we had this scheduled. So we decided in this particular case to go ahead with it, but we were going to basically in the future make sure that we don't interfere with holidays. So we kind of had two things. We got a Monday and we got a holiday, but and then we do make this available to members who do, some of them do watch it afterwards too. So Michael, why don't you take it from there and tell us what we need to know, what we should be concerned about now.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's good to see some familiar faces here. As I said earlier, my first experience testifying in the state legislature was in 1978. And then most recently was actually just this past session. And I think that one of the things that I just have to say that I was most proud of in my entire career was working with HIV/AIDS in the state legislature. And you may recall that back in the 1980s, the state legislature did something that no other state legislature did in the country, the early emerging AIDS. And Dwayne Benson and Dean Johnson and a whole group of senators and representatives got together and decided that we'd have a joint educational effort. You may recall, some of you, we were actually in the House chamber for almost 4 hours. And I gave a lecture on HIV/AIDS and what we knew and what we didn't know, and lots of really thoughtful, good questions. And our state was one of the models in terms of responding to HIV/AIDS in those early days, not taking to AIDS hysteria, et cetera. And, it was the leadership of the legislature that really made that happen. So it was a remarkable experience to be part of that. Well, today I'm going to talk to you about something that I wish I weren't going to talk to you about. I know that some people on this screen, and surely a lot of people in this state, just assume I'm Dr. Doom or Dr. Death. That's what I talk about. And my job is just to tell it as I see it, and what's going to happen. I in 2017 published a book, Deadliest Enemies: Our War Against Killer Germs. That laid out what a pandemic might look like with a respiratory virus, either influenza or the SARS-like viruses. And people just didn't want to believe that this could last for years, it could have the impact that it has, and so forth. And even in the earliest days, in early March of 2020, in those first 3 months of the pandemic, I put down you might say, a marker on the table by saying that based on what I was seeing, I thought that it was very possible that we could have over 800,000 deaths in this country in the next 18 months. And I was pretty much skewered at the stake by a lot of different sources, media, friends, family, etc., for scaring the hell out of people needlessly. And unfortunately, 18 months later, we hit our 8,000th death in this country. And, so I don't take any credit for that. It's my job. It's what I'm supposed to do, is give you a forecast like the weatherman does. And so today, my comments, I raise all this because I hope my comments are taken in that vein, that I think that this is a very serious situation confronting us. And I do see that we have some very, very challenging days ahead. First of all, what is a prion disease? Prions are nothing more than misfolded pieces of protein. And in some cases, they're infectious. Some cases, they arise genetically. For example, there are diseases of scrapie in sheep, kuru in humans, that occur as a result of transmission, infection, where the misfolded protein is actually in the saliva or body fluids of an animal, and one animal can transmit to another. In the case of kuru, it's cannibalism that allowed that to happen in the Southern Pacific. We also have a disease known as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and that is a disease that's genetically based, where about 1 out of a million people who are more predisposed to making this misfolded protein actually have this, and they will develop Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, about, as I said, 1 per million population. That is not by its nature from an infectious standpoint, but it can be infectious after you've had it in your brain. When this misfolded protein starts in your brain, what it does is it causes plaques. It basically causes the kind of conditions that results in greatly reduced brain function, ultimately an Alzheimer's disease-like picture, and then typically sudden death within weeks to months. The one area that people really are familiar with it, or at least if you've been around a while, you're familiar with it, and that is mad cow disease that occurred in the United Kingdom back in the 1980s. In this case, it was actually amplified where this misfolded protein in the central nervous system of cattle were being included back into making bone meal, this material that they feed back to cattle for protein. And the prion was in the central nervous system of the animal, the brain into the spinal column. And so that got fed back into the animals after it was cooked. And cooking does not at all destroy this misfolded protein. This is a very, very stable agent. To give you some idea just how challenging it is, if someone is operated on accidentally, I say accidentally in the sense I hope people don't do it, but that if you have a neurologic disease, a surgeon goes into your brain to do a biopsy or to examine a part of your brain, we end up often having to landfill that equipment. It cannot be adequately disinfected. That gives you an idea how hardy this misguided protein, misfolded protein actually is. Well, what happened in the 80s was people consumed all this ground beef or meat in general that came from animals who had gotten infected. And as a result of that, we saw then what we call variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or BSE, bovine spongiform encephalopathy. And this was all part of a condition then that actually happened pretty much more than 10 years after the initial hit in the animals, where it was first found. And as you may recall, the United Kingdom, parts of Europe had to literally destroy all their beef cattle at that time, milking cattle that would have been infected, and then had to restart all over again. And it took almost this 10-year time period before we saw the animal-related prion infection, and then that in humans. And there have been now, since that time, several hundred cases of BSE in humans and variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in Europe. So what is this all about with cervids? Cervids are of course, deer, mule deer, white-tailed deer, elk, and moose. And what happened in the 1960s, we saw the emergence of a prion-related condition called chronic wasting disease now in cervids, particularly in one university property where these animals were being examined for other reasons. And within short order, Colorado kind of became ground zero for where this happened. Since that time, it was a very slow spread, but it did occur in other animals in the mid-mountain region, and such that, you know, it was not seen as a big challenge to cervids as such. However, that all changed when we started seeing rapid magnification. And today, we know that 31 states and 4 Canadian provinces all have CWD, and it's spreading. And it's spreading quickly within states and between states. To give you some example, Dane County in Wisconsin, which probably has one of the highest rates of CWD in its deer, about 80%, last year had hunters come to Dane County from all 49 states and North America. The only one that didn't was Hawaii. And they take those deer back with them. And they, you know, the contamination occurs in wherever they go with these deer. So what happens when we see this in cervids? Well, one of the challenges we have is that they can be infected and infectious by having picked up the prion from other animals, close contact with other cervids, or even potentially eating grasses where carcasses of these animals have been deposited or they have just died. And the prion actually sinks into the soil, gets into the root system of things like grasses, and actually is in the plant. And why that's challenging is, in fact, because one of the things we have to be concerned about is the transmission via just grasses itself. And this is why the Norwegian Ministry of Agriculture have basically banned the importation of hay from North America to Norway, just to try to keep this out. Also, what's very different about this condition in the deer is that they, as I said, they can be infected for sometimes months before they show signs or symptoms. So a hunter who assumes that they've taken a deer that is otherwise healthy would have no way of knowing that, in fact, it's not. And one of the other challenges is, unlike with BSE, where again, the prion was primarily in the central spinal column, so you had to get that consumption or part of the brain. Now we see with this particular prion, the fact that it's actually in the nerves of the muscle. So if you're eating the meat itself, you're actually picking it up. Now, in terms of what's happening with animals, we estimate that at least 15 to 25,000 infected animals are being consumed each year in this country. And that, of course, doesn't tell you how many people, because there are many people who are consuming these animals or the meat thereof. And one of the other challenges we have is that at this time there is a test for this that you can apply to a carcass, but because so many deer are shot and killed during deer hunting season, the supply of testing is often limited, and it makes it very difficult, sometimes taking weeks to get test results back. So most hunters just decide not to do it. And they look at their deer and it seems healthy to them. And, you know, this is just guys like Mike Osterholm out there scaring the hell out of people about this situation. Don't believe it. Well, one of the problems that's happened over the course of the last 5 to 7 years is early research showed that the prions from these animals, these cervids, would only rarely adapt to what we call humanized mice, meaning these are basically mice that have been in their immune systems reestablished to be pretty similar to that of humans. We do research for them all the time. And today, these prions that we're seeing in cervids throughout North America and in Canada now actually readily jump into humanized mice, which means the strains are changing. And yet these are the same strains that are causing severe disease in the white-tailed deer population in particular, but also mule deer, elk, etc. And so that we're concerned that we are right now in a prime setting for lots of transmission to humans. We know, for example, also that most venison, deer meat, is processed often at local processing plants. And you bring in your 50 or 60 pounds of venison to have it made into sausage, which then, you get back 50 to 60 pounds, but there's no guarantee it's really your meat. And at this time, all that equipment is contaminated. Just as I pointed out, you couldn't decontaminate the surgical equipment. You can't decontaminate this stuff. And so we surely have potential major mixing locations in these meat plant locations too. Now, one of the other things is there's some preliminary data now showing the possibility of transmission of this prion from cervids to feral pigs in the southern states. And this is just a matter of time, we think, before we're going to see more transmission to other animals. And, when this whole debate recently came up about deer farming and, the impact it's having on the agricultural industry, and somehow we in public health, we're going to take out an industry. Well, deer farming has contributed substantially to the spread of this prion around the country. And I think about from an agricultural protection standpoint, do you not want to protect the porcine and bovine populations more than you do a few deer farms? To me, that seemed like a no-brainer. But on the other hand, it surely came across as if, here's the big hairy arm of government that was basically, trying to do in this industry. And we have seen substantial transmission in between deer farms and the products that they sell, such as scents and so forth. So where are we at on this? Well, one of the things our center is doing right now is bringing together international experts on this topic. We have an expert advisory board right now of 49 individuals who are the leading people around the world, including even the group from the United Kingdom. And we're setting up basically, for lack of a better way to describe it, a tabletop approach where we're laying out, what if we see animal to human transmission? What would that look like? How to detect it? What would happen in terms of public's response? And if we see some transmission, I'm certain we'll see lots of transmission. Lots meaning potentially not just a few hundred cases, but much more than that. That's going to be a huge challenge. There's a single lab in the country, and I was just there recently at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, that is the human laboratory testing facility for prion disease. And they are grossly understaffed. If we saw this in humans and there was a big need for testing, it just wouldn't happen. And think about how that was with COVID when you couldn't get tested, and how challenging that was. The outcry would be immense. Right now, CDC has basically a half-time person working on this topic on a contract basis. We just haven't seen the understanding of the importance of this and what's going to happen. What happens if we have major trade embargoes on bovine and porcine, not only outside the country, but between state to state? This is going to be a huge challenge. And so we've got those challenges ahead of us. And what we're trying to do is lay out, so if any of these things happen, what are the next questions, the next issues? What are the messages? How would you talk about this? My big fear is that, as we know right now, wildlife conservation in this country is largely supported on the backs of deer hunting licenses. And if they were suddenly to see a big decrease because people were now no longer feeling safe to actually hunt deer, this could cause a significant impact on wildlife conservation activities at DNRs throughout all the country. At the same time, also, we know that if you don't hunt deer, the population only continues to increase. And remember, they'll still get CWD, but they'll still live 3 or 4 years. And the implications of an unchecked deer management problem is huge. Everything from how many deer hit cars to what happens with crop issues, etc. And we would see an explosion of the deer population in short order if we saw basically any change in the level of deer hunting that occurs in this country. So these are all huge challenges that we have right now. And again, it's going to be one of these ones, one day I think people are going to wake up and say, where did this come from? Why were we not doing more about it? And that's been the case. Now, I'm very pleased to say, however, the University of Minnesota has been one of the leaders. Our center has been leading on the human side. The vet school actually has devised some of the best testing right now that we have in the country, which actually came from a legislative support 2 years ago. And so we're in better position here to try to respond to this situation. but at the same time, it's going to be a challenge. We're seeing more and more spread of CWD in Minnesota, even though we've had some of the most rigorous and responsive programs put in place by the DNR. It's just a reality of where we're at right now. So I'll leave it with that. I told Rick I'd do about 20 minutes and then open it up to questions and answers and discussion. I welcome your input. You're, as former leaders, you understand how difficult sometimes trying to, share with the public leadership decisions or leadership approaches. And so I surely welcome all of you. One of the things I will have to say, that talking about my length of time at the legislature, I will also add a corollary to that, is the older I get, the more vulnerable I am to learning. So I look forward to hearing from you what it is that I need to think about. So I'll turn it back over to you all.
Okay, if you want, probably the easiest way to ask questions is either signal on the screen with a wave or something like this with your hand, or else you have the icons that can be used too. So if anybody's interested,
I see
in
Roz
talking.
Roz
Yeah.
has got a question.
Roz has a
Comment,
question.
or a
Go ahead,
comment.
Roz.
Thank you. My question is so chronic wasting disease, they're testing for that. Are they keeping up on the demand? Is that
No.
program working?
No.
No.
The testing's there, but there is no good support for the reagents we need. We've had major shortages of testing materials throughout the last year. And again, this is one of those examples. I mean, right now, everyone with cancer in this country who's being treated should be out, protesting in the most public ways. We have over 120 drug shortages right now, primary drug shortages in this country, of which cancer drugs make up a number of them. And imagine being on chemotherapy and you can't get it. And we don't know when you're going to get it because of these drug shortages. Well, the same thing is true with laboratory testing issues. We don't have, everything's just in time delivery. And even with the events of China, where a lot of this stuff originated there, it's not. So we're seeing major delays in getting testing done because they just don't have enough tests. So this is something we're addressing in our efforts as to what has to be the minimal amount of material, reagent, et cetera, so that testing can be done. So this is a really important point you're raising. Yep.
My old district was between Brainerd and Alexandria. I didn't have either Brainerd or Alec in my district.
Yeah.
And I can tell you this should be a high topic of interest up there, obviously. There's a great deal of hunting going on. And there's also some of those farms that you're talking about that are the deer farms.
Right.
So it gets complicated real quick. And then, and I'm not bringing up COVID to talk about COVID, but I think we've learned that we're kind of in a environment right now where there's a general distrust in terms of information coming out from expert organizations and stuff, and whether it's the health department or the CDC or whatever. And it's, as policymakers, it's very difficult to figure out how to get people to respond and process good information. Where to get it and how to process it.
Yeah, if I could just comment, I think one of the examples that has really been unfortunate here in Minnesota addresses that area you just talked about. In Beltrami County, you may be aware, there was an outbreak of chronic wasting disease in a deer farm. And the individual, rather than doing what he was supposed to do, took the dead carcasses and hauled them off onto state land and just left them there. And the U of M got involved with the DNR when they finally found it and tested the soil around there, and they were able to pick up the prion easily in the soil. So it's in the plants. So the DNR were basically required to put this I think it's an 8-foot or 10-foot fence around this entire area where these carcasses had been disposed of and left there, just to block off so that no other animal could get into it. And it's been part of the challenge of people understanding it. So yeah, it's been and you're right, Rick. I don't think that a lot of people understand you know, what these issues are. When they hear people like me talk, the first thing they do is tune us out because they don't want to deal with it. Second of all, they don't trust us anyway. And third of all, when it finally does happen, they want to know why in the hell we didn't tell them what we were going to do about it, when to start with. Okay, so you just expect that that's going to be the cycle.
Jane has a question.
I don't know if it's a question, it's a frustration, because 30 years ago, when I was chair of the committee, that's when these Cervidae farmers wanted to expand and they wanted to bring elk in. And I kept telling them, they're bringing them in from Colorado. That's not a good idea.
Yep.
And they got all these promises, how, oh, we're going to have 12-foot fences. And then you'd find out that, oh, maybe they fence one area. Well, that's brilliant. They make scraping, they're protecting our, and I thought I could get the deer hunters on my side, and there was some of them that were cooperative, but so many of them are so short-sighted. I keep thinking, it was extremely frustrating. My own son is a deer hunter. He has been taking now he processes it. He did take it to another place that was supposed to just do his. But hearing your comments about how you can't clean the equipment,
Yeah.
be nervous for my grandchildren for, what they might be, because they live on a lot of venison from my son.
A lot of people do, and for a lot of people, it's essential. I mean, it's a staple for them of protein. So it is a real challenge. And I just want to say that yes, your leadership back then, trying to raise these issues, surely could be used again today. We're a little farther along today, but Representative Hansen and others have really done a remarkable job of trying to educate. But it's still largely a group of people that say, what the hell? Like I said, I mean, 80% of the animals in Dane County are infected right now. And we got hunters from all over the country that come there to hunt because of the size of the deer, everything, and they eat the meat, and they, it's like smoking. It's not going to hurt me until it hurts you,
Well, and I suggested that, some of these places, they could have like a petting zoo where mom and the kids could feed the deer while dad's out pretending to be a hunter in an enclosed cage to get a trophy on their wall. It was a difficult time, and that's how many years ago, and it's very frustrating to hear it now. So
Okay.
Yep.
Peg.
Well, the good news, the legislature banned deer farms, so they're making progress.
Well, Dr. Doom.
It's good to see you again, Peggy. It's always good to see you.
We know how to treat bacterial diseases, but how in the dickens do you treat a prion?
We don't have any treatments for this at all. It's all supportive care. I mean, if there's any good news, and this is a tragic way of saying good news, is unlike Alzheimer's, this tends to be much more progressive quicker, so that people aren't, living for several years or more with this. Typically it's within months that you see people from the first symptoms until they die, at least based on BOC and that. We'll have to see in humans what happens. I just have to say, and it's like my previous predictions, and I hopefully I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But I would say the probability of us seeing CWD in humans in the upcoming years is very, very, very high. And that is the consensus of all my colleagues. This group of people that we have that advise our center, the 49 experts, we're all on the same page. It's not like there's two camps or multiple camps of dissension. Everybody says this is coming. This is coming. So
Is there any research going on?
Well, there really isn't. There's some that's going on for variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, CJD, but it's limited, very limited. And how do you do on these misfolded proteins? What do you do about it? So, part of the problem is that when the problem finally hits, then you put the money into it. I mean, it's like COVID. We did very little to deal with COVID or coronavirus vaccines till the pandemic hit. And then you deal with it. And I think with CWD, I expect the same. Because remember, in the minds of most people, this is not a problem. And it isn't yet as it relates to clinical disease in humans. But by the time you find it in that level of clinical disease in humans, it's already way too late.
What's the mechanism?
Rick.
Yeah, Bob,
Yeah, I don't know
Go
if you
ahead.
can see me or not, but
we can see
We
you
can-
and
we-
hear you.
We can see and
Oh,
hear you. Yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
Your comment about the deer hunting and sharing or taking the meat to the butcher resonates, because I've gone deer hunting since 1975, and for years we used to we butcher our own deer and made our own sausage and all of that. But more recently, our sons, I go up there more to observe than actually hunt, but they take it to a butcher shop in Emily. And you're right, that meat gets shared. And so while they are pretty confident that any deer they shoot are okay, there's no real way of knowing what somebody else's deer, what condition that might be in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's, I think, again, none of us want to put local meat processing plants out of business. That's the last thing we want to do. But at the same time, how do you deal with that in terms of the, potential for transmission? And I think that's going to be a big issue when it finally happens. I think a lot of them will end up having to start out with new equipment, landfill what they have, and then absolutely require every animal that they process is tested and certified tested before they bring it in. I think that's the solution ultimately. That's expensive. That's going to be challenging. But I mean, that's what we ought to be thinking about right now. How can you do that? So, Jane, I think
Jane?
Yeah, just following up on that, you said there's no way to disinfectant, I mean, even like the highest temperatures or any chemical? that
No,
would-
what we have to do is we use a chemical digester that actually the U has one now. For days, you have to put it into this material that basically, there wouldn't be any equipment left if you used it in that type of a setting. So that's the problem. I wish it were much simpler than that, and it's not.
Scary.
Yeah. And Roz, just to your point, this test is pretty simple that we have now. We just can't get reagents. And we don't have labs that are geared up to test for it as such. So we would agree. I think this is one of the areas we're concentrated on heavily, is how to build lab capacity in this country. So when it surges, it's there, and that's going to be a critical point. This test is quite good, and it is relatively easy to do. It's what we call a PCR test, which you've heard of from COVID. And it's just a matter of, can you actually offer it? And I can tell you the group at the university has actually been held back by weeks for testing because of a lack of reagents.
What's the cost of the testing?
I don't have that number, and it's not prohibited at all. I mean,
Okay.
it's not a test that is going to cost you hundreds and hundreds of dollars at all.
And it's relatively instant. You can get it results.
Yeah,
right
you
away?
can. Well, I mean, the University of Minnesota is doing testing right now on cervids, but again, it's just a very small part of the demand. So, I mean, if people really were to start embracing this, it would be, again, a time limit. I mean, imagine a lab that tests 100,000 tests a year that are spaced out over 12 months. Imagine a lab that tests 100,000 tests a year that are spaced out for 2 weeks. And see, one of the problems is, how do you deal with that surge? Because that's when deer season is. So, it's not something you can stretch out. And of course, the deer, as Bob, you just shared, I mean, is something you basically have to process now. You're not going to wait 4 months to say, okay, now I got my test result back. That's not going to be satisfactory at all. And that's what we don't have capacity for right now. Imagine if every airplane at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport had to land within 1 hour every day. The airport couldn't operate. Now we still have 24 hours a day they can land. And so I think that's the challenge. We're trying to figure out how to deal with this issue.
Yeah, Wayne, you're on mute. Wayne, you're on mute. Wayne, you're on
got
mute.
it. There you got it.
So have you tried working with industry in a capitalistic way of, look, you make reagent. If you would make more of this, we could really expand this. Is that kind of a blocker
Well, again, it's supply and demand. It's like the issue with drugs themselves, critical life-saving drugs. If there is not enough sales, people are going to say, well, we're not going to invest in it. I mean, a good example of what happened with COVID testing. A lot of these labs that got into COVID testing went broke because it was boom and bust. All of a sudden there was a lot, and the next day there was none. And so most of these lab reagent companies say, well, we're not going to build great new infrastructure because, you're marginally using only a little bit. And that's the challenge. To them, this is small potatoes. So your point's right on the mark about what we need to do. And this is, to me, is critical infrastructure. You got to have that. A good example, and we're seeing it right now unfortunately, with Ukraine, is the military actually pays lots of money to keep defense contractors warm, meaning that they don't have to gear up from zero when they suddenly need new missiles. Even though they haven't made any for a year or two, they can suddenly make a lot because of the money. If we could, help pay to keep laboratory reagents and labs themselves up and operating, then it would be there at the time of a potential uptick. Problem is that's just not in the cards for anybody right now. Why would we pay that? And that's the challenge we have. Yeah.
Margaret? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought she had her hand up, but apparently
Jane had a question about spending out the deer hunting season. One of the things I learned coming from rural Iowa, is you don't mess with the deer hunting season. Okay, I mean, you can mess with elections, you can mess with a lot of, do not mess with the deer hunting season. So I don't know what they could do to draw it out or not. I'm not sure what would happen there. Okay, so I'm not your expert on that. I may just say one thing. I just want to comment because our center deals with the DNRs around the entire country. And, and government often gets a bad rap. Everybody assumes a state employee is, not doing their job, or you're not doing it the way I think you should do it. The Minnesota DNR has been a real model for this issue. They have been really progressive. They've been very thoughtful. And the people there that we work with really are among the nation's leaders in this area. And so we're very fortunate in that regard to have the DNR we have.
Well, your analogy about trying to get all the planes to land in an hour is apt as it relates to deer hunting, because
Yep,
most hunters go opening weekend.
exactly right.
Most of the hunters maybe take off Friday or Monday, but they don't take off a week. And so that if they shoot a deer over that weekend, it's got to go to the butcher by Sunday evening or Monday morning. And in recent years, when the season has been warmer, I mean, they got to get it to them faster, because
Yep,
you either do that or you got to get some blocks of ice to put in the cavity of the deer so it doesn't rot while it's still in deer camp.
yep.
So
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, to try to do all that testing, I don't know how you could get the capacity to do all that within that short of a time frame.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that, Bob, that's the secondary impact of that is that there will be hunters that will decide, well, if I can't get it done, get it tested, etc., I'm not going to hunt it because I'm worried about my family. Now, there'll be others that won't care. They'll just say, I don't believe this stuff. It's not real, whatever. But I think that's the challenge we have for wildlife conservation in this country. If we do see a sizable drop in the number of deer licenses pulled every year, that's going to affect the herd size, which will only increase transmission because there'll be more animals closer together. And so it's kind of a negative spiral that really is a challenge. And so this is the kind of thinking we need to think about now. This is the kind of, okay, so what if, and not wait till it happens. But I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's really a huge, huge issue. And I agree with you, Jane, by the way. Jane just posted a really important statement. The challenges I just raised about deer farming in Minnesota have been under the auspices of the Board of Animal Health and not the DNR. And they have handled this very poorly, very poorly. And fortunately, this year's legislature transferred that authority from the Board of Animal Health to DNR. And I was one of the strongest supporters of that. I thought that was really important. So thank you, Jane, for making that point.
Well, I have
there-
to say, I was one of the first ones to give you or refer to the moniker of Dr. Gloom and Doom.
I'm used to it, Bob.
Ah,
Not necessarily in the negative sense. It's just
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you usually didn't have good news to share.
Well, you know, my job is just to try to forecast it out there and give people a sense of what's coming, so we're not so surprised. And when you're surprised, that's when it, you know, it makes it even more complicated. And you know, COVID is a good example. People, I mean, I got to tell you, in the earliest days of COVID, I published a piece on January 20th of 2020. 2.5 weeks into the pandemic. This was going to be a pandemic. Get on with it. We have to understand what the implications are. It's huge. And I went that following week to the Journal of the American Medical Association editorial group. And I said, can we put together a perspectives piece that says to the doctors of this country, this is what's coming, get ready. They not only said no, but a week later, they posted an article, kind of a cartoon, that on one column had all the things bad about flu, and then all the things about COVID. And the conclusion was, COVID's nothing. Flu is what we ought to be worried about. I mean, my own colleagues were some of the worst to bring around those first 3 months. And then, of course, when it was really well into the situation, then they, of course, converted. But, you know, so I think the skepticism is often makes it more challenging. And then the decisions that get made sometimes are not the best decisions. And I hope with this one, by actually laying out in a tabletop-like exercise, so the document will review what this happens, what happens, if this happens, what happens, so that people can just see it in black and white and say, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? And, you know, my best professional judgment is that, you know, this is going to be a hell of a problem and not in the too distant future.
From a public policy standpoint, do you think that based on the COVID experience, and I hate going back to COVID, but I deliberately didn't want to, but is that going to complicate things on other health issues coming up of this nature, other pandemic related things? Or what's your sense of that?
Well, you know, Rick, I never ever believed I'd see the day where people could legitimately say we have alternative facts. Okay, you know, I mean, science is science. I mean, you know, E equal MC squared, you can't have an alternative equation. It doesn't work. You know, gravity works the way it works, okay? And I think that what's happened is the public has largely accepted the fact that you can have alternative facts. And so it's just, I'll put mine up against yours. And, you know, we have a lot of younger parents today that, based on what they read on the internet, they'll go to their doctors and say, well, this isn't true because, you know, I've got data, right? I've got the information right here that says, you know, the cows can fly. And this is so challenging that, and that's really been spurred on by COVID. I think that has really amplified that. I'm very worried about that issue because a lot of, I think, important science discussions are getting derailed because of that. It's okay to have alternative facts, or it's okay not to trust in government, whatever. And you know, I think that's a huge challenge.
There's a Harvard professor who's left Harvard now, and you see him on the news quite a bit. Tom Nichols wrote the book called, I think it was The Death of Expertise. And his argument is that, the way I understand it, is that we now kind of value all source information as being equal.
Yeah.
If we find something that we believe in that's on the internet and it reinforces what we believe, then that's equal with somebody who really does have expertise in an area. And that gets us in a kind of a very dangerous situation, no matter which side. I mean, I can give examples on both sides, quite frankly, in terms of political debate, but where, you know, we run into these things, but
Well,
it just seems like it's getting more challenging.
yeah, I would suggest that it really isn't anything new. That fear has driven opinion and conclusions forever. I'll give you a couple of examples quickly. 1973, my first year in the legislature, we considered the Equal Rights Amendment. Remember? Equality under the law shall not be denied based on one's sex. I got invited to a meeting of 200 Catholic women in the basement of St. Wenceslaus Church. And you know what they were telling me? If you pass this, the boys are going to be using the girls' restrooms and all these other horrible things are going to happen. Fast forward 1989, we considered passing a law that says it will be unlawful to discriminate in housing and employment based on one's sexual orientation. I got letters from constituents saying, well, I don't want homosexuals moving into my neighborhood because they're going to bring their gay lifestyle. But they also said, this is going to mean you're going to have teachers in elementary schools teaching in drag. Well, that law passed in 1993, and almost every school district in the state has employed gay teachers. And so what that fear, it's a different issue, same fear. COVID, different issue, same fear. I'm testifying next Monday before the New Prague School Board on transgender rights. Different issue, same fear. And it's been going on for the 50 years I've been involved in public life. People, if they can't find an alternative fact, well, it's easier now because of the internet, but if they can't find an alternative fact, they'll make one up.
Yep.
It's my lecture for the
No, I would consider those words of wisdom, not a lecture.
And so it doesn't become any more complicated. It's the same set of circumstances is what Bob's saying.
Yeah. These are challenging times. I mean, we all recognize that. These are very challenging times.
Yeah.
So.
Well, any other questions for Michael?
Well, I just would say thank you to everyone here who were on today, and thank you for your leadership over the years. I'm very proud to live in Minnesota, really proud.
Yeah, thank you for your leadership and this.
So can I just tell you one quick story though, just to follow up on Bob's very thoughtful point? So a couple of weeks ago, I was in the elevator at the parking ramp at the university, go down 100 Washington Avenue to my office. And I get in and a very nice little lady is standing in the corner already in the elevator. She probably was 80, 85, frail little lady. And she looks up at me and says, and I had my N95 respirator on. She said, "Do I know you?" And I said, "Well, I don't think so, ma'am." And she said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I teach here at the university." She said, "What do you teach?" And I said, "Infectious diseases." And all of a sudden, even though she was in the corner, she took a step back. She looked at me, and just at that point, the door opens, and she kind of slides her back along the wall, gets to the door and says, "Would you just shut up? Stop talking. Just shut up." And I thanked her, and she walked out of the elevator and just realized that was, my lesson for the day.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, certainly appreciate you taking the time to do this. Very helpful, very informative, and it's part of a series that we do. And you're the first one after the session, and thank you again. And
well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, everybody have a great week, and we'll see you at the next one. Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, thank you.
Great.
Bye.